Welcome to OBE. My guest today is Georgia Lambert. Georgia has a long and storied list of credentials and accolades, spanning 50 years of experience in the field of esoteric studies. She received formal training in both Eastern and Western disciplines, methods, and traditions, and her specialty is the synthesis of the Western mystery tradition. She has addressed private groups in both the United States and in Britain, and currently teaches in-depth classes to students around the world via online courses. Her classes cover a wide range of esoteric traditions and meditation techniques, including the Ageless Wisdom, the Kabbalah, Masonry, and the Arthurian quest for the Grail. She's here to summarize her 40 years of teaching in part 1 of a 2-part episode. So without further ado, let's welcome Georgia to the show. How are you doing today, Georgia?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
Well, we're all excited to have you here. You're an expert in a number of fields in the esoteric subject matter, so I'm glad you came on for a 2-part episode because it's going to take some time to get through a lot of this.
I think so. Even with only 2 hours, this is sort of an overview, but it's enough for people to get started, and hopefully it'll clear up a lot of misinformation that's floating around out there in the metaphysical and New Age circles.
You teach classes, online courses, and some of the courses are 2 years long, and I mean, this is pretty in-depth, right?
Right.
All right, well, why don't you get us started, and you can you can start us off however you would like to.
Okay, well, one of the subjects that is garnering a lot of attention out there in the marketplace is the subject of chakras. And there's so much misinformation about this particular subject. So I thought we would start at the beginning, and before we get to chakras specifically, we have to place them in context. And that is that these energy centers, called chakras, which in the East means fiery wheel, these are energy centers that are actually organs of a more subtle body. So I thought with our first part here, we could take a look at what is the subtle body and how does it work, or at least a brief overview. And I'm assuming you have the chart that shows the subtle body there that people can follow along?
Yes, I do. I'm putting it up now.
Oh, wonderful. Well, the easiest way to begin to talk about this is to go to a model that we find in Tibet, among other places. And many of your listeners and viewers, I'm sure, are familiar with those beautiful little ivory balls that are carved in Tibetan art, where you have a sphere within a sphere within a sphere, and each one moves independently, but it's contained within the larger sphere, carved from a solid block. It's quite an art form. And that has to do with the idea of life within life within life, or as Richard Hoagland would say, wheels within wheels within wheels. So the first thing to understand is that we are multidimensional beings, that we exist in many frequencies of matter simultaneously. And the subtle body isn't just one thing, it's got layers to it, just like an onion. And so what I thought we would do today is start talking about what these different layers are, the major layers. And we'll start with the densest layer first, which is this physical dense body that we're all familiar with. And if you can see on the chart, I don't have the first layer other than the actual human figure. But we know, for instance, that physical tissue puts out some kind of electrical activity and heat. We know that the electrical output of muscles can be experienced via the technology that we have, as in bodybuilders, knowing how much energy they're actually putting into a muscle, or how much electrical energy is getting through to a particular muscle. And we also know that certain disease tissues, like cancer tissue, for instance, is hotter than healthy tissue. And so there are some people that can see that. It's kind of like the experience of being on a asphalt road on a very hot day, and you can kind of see the heat waves rising from those that asphalt or the tin roof on the shed.
Yes, for part 3 of our Aura trilogy, Pam Osley is coming onto the show, and Pam sees auras.
Well, that's going to be clarified a little bit more today, because you can have, let's say, a patient in a hospital, and you can have 5 clairvoyants in that hospital observing that person, and they can all see completely different things, and they can all be right. Because it depends on what particular layer you're tuning into. Most clairvoyants don't have the capacity, because they're usually born with the ability, or they acquire it through a near-death experience. Some of them do, but they don't have control over what they're tuning their clairvoyant vision to. It's kind of like, bringing something into focus. There are certain people that are trained that can tune in to these different layers at will, but that's very rare. One of the most famous clairvoyants of this type was Jeffrey Hodson, who for years worked with the Theosophical Society. But anyway, so the first layer is really, there's not much to talk about. We know about the physical body. Regular medicine knows a lot about the physical body and the energy that is coming off that physical body, whether it be, electricity, as in brain waves, or, just the heat signature of the tissue itself. So we don't need to spend any time with that. The next thing on the chart is a little sort of golden yellow line that I have drawn there that's conforming to the physical body, usually 3 to 6 inches, depending on the person, depending on their vitality, 3 to 6 inches outside of the physical body. This is termed in most esoteric traditions as the physical etheric body. This is that energy body that science is just now nosing into and beginning to study. The acupuncture system is part of this layer. Kirlian, the Kirlian effect is part of this layer. Many of your listeners are familiar with, photographs of a leaf where part of the leaf has been cut away and it shows the Kirlian geometry, the Kirlian structure of light that underlies that. The physical etheric body conforms to the physical body, and in fact, it underlies the physical nervous system. In Hindu tradition, this particular body is called the nadis system, or nadis system. And again, it conforms to the physical nerves, so that if you're very tall, it's conforming to a very tall body. If you're very short, it's conforming to a very short body. This is also why when people freshly die and they appear to say goodbye to their family or friends, they still look like them, only sometimes better. If they died at 83, they may show up as they looked in their 40s or
in their prime.
whatever. Yeah, in their prime, or if they've lost a limb, for instance, the limb will be whole in some cases.
Well, there's a little trick that I've done and I share with people that allows you to feel this field. And it's a pretty simple trick. You simply put your index fingers up close to each other. You don't touch, but you get them closer together and then a little closer. I tell people to do it like when you're in bed at night, getting ready to fall asleep, and your mind is focused on it, and you bring your fingers very close but not touching. You can feel it. So
Yeah.
It's like, wow, I feel something, but they're not touching. That's what that is, right?
Yeah, that's this particular layer. It's also, as I said, what shows up in Kirlian photography, where they've done photographs of, let's say, a healer at rest, and then a healer when they're, dialed in and they're doing their healing shtick. And there's actually a different energy coming off of their hands.
Mm-hmm.
That's using this particular layer. So this particular layer is interesting because this is, again, this area that science is just starting to recognize. Again, with things like acupuncture and Kirlian photography, and this would be this network that's not unique to the human body, but every physical thing has this supportive structure, or it couldn't have a physical dense shape.
Physical living beings, or just every object?
Everything. Every object has this. And everything is connected to everything else. When they talk about the matrix or the force or the World Wide Web or geometry.
I was going to ask you about the force and say, is this what the Jedi are using, or say a martial arts master?
Well, that gets... we got to go to another layer for that one.
Okay.
Because there's this borderline. These layers overlap one another. These layers are different frequencies of matter, but they coexist in the same space. But they interpenetrate one another.
Well, if you're standing in a room, like we are, there's thousands of radio and TV frequencies flooding the room.
Exactly.
All overlapping, yeah.
Sure. Now, our etheric body, or the etheric body of a plant or an animal or a rock or whatever it is, could be thought of as a crystallization or condensation of the network of the planet itself. And in ancient times, particularly in the Greek healing schools, they believed that if all of your organs were in tune with the sound or the geometry of the planet itself, you would be healthy. And so they would find these sort of power points or acupuncture points within the grid of the earth, the etheric body of the earth, and then they would put their healing temple right on these power points or matrix points. And the architecture of the temple, the incense that was used, the chants or sounds would all conspire to amplify that particular sound.
It's like building the pyramids on the vortexes to
Sure.
harness the energy, yeah.
I mean, you've got, Christian churches, Gothic cathedrals built over old Roman temples, built over Druidic sites, and ad nauseum, because at a much earlier time in our planet's history, this planetary grid or matrix was understood, and our relationship to it.
Yes.
So a lot of these old PowerPoints within the earth are being revisited and reinstated, and others of them naturally need to fade out and go, because we know that the resonance of the planet itself is changing. The Schumann resonance, which is the natural hum of the earth, is going up.
That's between the ground and 60,000 feet up, right? That's the space between the sky and the ground.
Yeah, but technically it's the etheric body of the earth.
Got it.
When the Hindus talk about prana, which is a particular vitality that we get from sunlight. For instance, maybe some people have had the experience of looking out over an ocean on a warm day, and around their peripheral vision, they see little shining sparks. The Hindus call these prana globules, and it's a kind of light that is digested by our physical etheric body, just as physical food is digested by the physical body. And the idea of blessing one's food has to do really with tuning into this etheric component of food. The old festival in South America of the Day of the Dead, where they cook and they put the food out, and the whole idea of the spirits taking the food, obviously they don't take the physical food, but the energy component that's put into that food via the love and care and conscious focus. And so the mechanics of the physical etheric, you could do months on that. But in terms of just looking at how it applies to us, this physical etheric layer, again, underlies the physical nerves. It extends out from the body 3 to 6 inches. It can extend out further, and that's something we'll talk about in a minute with another layer. But this is what makes you look like you. And again, in the death process, when you drop the physical body, because true death is the shedding of more than one layer. It's not just the dropping of the physical body. When the physical body is dropped, everything else is still intact for a while. Just like when you cut the leaf away, that Kirlian network remains intact, but eventually it fades. If that didn't fade, you would never be able to, as the Hindus would say, take a new incarnation and be a different gender or a different ethnicity or in a totally different type of body. So that matrix, that etheric network that underlies the physical nerves stays intact for a while, but as the death process ensues, that layer must be shed, and the components or the energy that makes up that physical etheric body is returned to the energy body of the earth itself. It's like the old idea of returning to the dust from whence it came. This is true not only of the physical body, but it's true of the physical etheric body as well.
Yeah, I've often wondered if when you reincarnate, you're accessing the same energy that you left behind in your last life.
You're not accessing necessarily the same actual atoms, but you are drawing to yourself the same frequency of matter. In other words, the idea at death is to, when you give your bodies back to the dust from whence they came, the idea is to give them back in better condition than when you got them. So that as you inhabit your body, you elevate it, you quicken it via your consciousness, your quality of your thoughts and your feelings. So all of that is conditioned. And so when you pick up that matter again, you pick up the same quality, the same frequency that you left off with, not necessarily the same actual physical atoms.
And you also retain the summation of your past lives on a subconscious level, at least.
Right.
Great. Very interesting.
And that's a whole subject that we could really play with, because the soul, that consciousness, who we really are, our true identity, is outside of time and space.
Yes.
Which means that from the angle of the soul, all of your incarnations are going on simultaneously.
Yes, right.
And when you accept that, then you've got to rethink things like karma and how that actually works and all kinds of stuff, which is a subject for another day.
I know a lot of people say that your lives happen simultaneously, but I tend to disagree, because I have found that in the spirit world, there is passing time, and It's different than here, yes, but time does pass there. Things are going on, there's things happening, there's things that are going to happen. So
Yes,
there is time.
but that's still the spirit world. Again, this we could do a whole show on the after death states, but there's layers to the spirit world,
Mm-hmm.
and esoterically, it's said that time is an illusion, but cycles aren't, because all matter is cyclic. So there are cycles on these other layers that coincide but are different necessarily than the way time is experienced here in physicality.
Yes.
But if you look at the Buddhist tradition or the Hindu tradition, this is still within the realm of what they call the three lower worlds, which is the realm of matter, which is physical matter, emotional or astral matter, and mental matter.
Yeah, because the astral plane, I mean, you could say the astral plane is the Earth's physical etheric, maybe, because.
No, the astral plane is the next layer that we're going to talk about.
Well, isn't the astral plane the closest plane to the Earth plane, I guess?
No, physical etheric is closer.
Okay.
And because it's just one tiny little half step up from physical dense.
Okay.
And as we move into this next age, more and more children will be born with etheric vision. It's sort of like, it's not extrasensory perception, it's extended sensory perception. And this won't be clairvoyantly, this will be actually through the mechanism of the physical eyes, which works a little differently than how clairvoyance works. So there are a lot of clairvoyants that can close their physical eyes and still see stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas physical etheric vision, you need your physical eyes. If you close your eyes, you can't see.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that our eyes are becoming sensitive to ultraviolet light is an indication that our vision, as well as our other senses, are very slowly moving into this wavelength of physical etheric. But it's happening so gradually that we don't notice it as being any different from physical dense.
Do you think that could be related to the galactic alignment that happened a few years ago, and a new energy is born every 26,000 years as we go around the galaxy, and then we line up with the center? A new energy is born, and depending on how people on the planet use that energy will determine the course of life on the planet.